We hear this phrase a lot: business is bad or business is slow. Do you think about what that statement means? It's basically saying people are not spending on my business, they're not buying from me, and they're not hiring my services, meaning I don't have a job. Now, there's obviously one main reason for this, and most times it's an issue with money. Having money gives you purchasing power, which is the power to buy, the power to trade, the power to hire, or even the power to fire, because now you have options. In this video, I'll discuss demand and disposable income so that you can see how this relationship is the lifeline of an economy. In the end, we'll see that this relationship provides one of the answers to solving the unemployment crisis in Kenya today. Welcome to Wanjikuseyeke. Hi, my name is Susan Wanjiku. I'm the founder of Wanjikuseyeke, and here I break down the relationship between economic development and governance so that you can understand, engage, and influence the matters that affect you and I. I know we have some new subscribers since my last video. I'd like to welcome you to this channel, and if you're a veteran, I'd like to also thank you for staying with us and watching. We're in the middle of the political economy series, and just to do a quick recap, in my previous video I stated that an economy is a place where interrelated activities take place. Interrelated meaning that the economic decisions that you make end up affecting other people. So let's understand how a simple economic system works so that you can see what I mean by these interrelations or interrelated. So an economic system is basically how countries organize their economies so that they can produce and consume and distribute goods and services. An economic system is circular, where money flows in a circular manner. So let me ask you, when you want a new jacket, do you decide to knit one yourself? Or if you want furniture or a chair, do you suddenly decide to become a carpenter or start learning carpenting, woodwork skills so that you can build your furniture? Or if you want to take your kids to school, or if you want to go to school, do you now build an entire school? And a teacher is also needed. So do you now go and decide to get teaching schools? No, you don't. Why? Because you don't have all the time and money in the world to do everything and to be everything at the same time. However, if you have the money, you pay money to businesses that produce those things. And at the same time, let's take the case of a business owner who owns a factory. Now, a factory has many different departments that all work together. But let's say if the business owner wants to advertise his goods, does he run to school to suddenly learn marketing? Or does he buy billboards? And the same way, if he wants to manage his finances well, does he also go to school again now to learn how to manage finances? He doesn't. Because if he can afford it, it obviously makes more sense to hire people who are qualified in these areas, and he pays them to do that. So take out from this, businesses are consumers of labor, which is my services as an employee, and also consumers of goods and services. These are the raw materials that they use in producing business. And money is obviously the means of exchange. So the word money changes depending on who's earning it, and businesses make profits and employees earn salaries, but it's all money that's circulating. Then we have intermediaries such as banks and other financial institutions, which are also businesses, but they get their money from us individuals and businesses who save their money with them, and then these banks use that money to lend it to businesses and individuals and even the government. So you can see this is an entire flow of cash, and it's known as the circular flow of income, which is just money exchanging hands, the same money moving around the same system. So the money that you're paid for your work is the same one that you use to buy things or to save in the bank. And this same money is the same cash that is lent to individuals. Then we finally have governments, and most of the times governments just act as regulators. So they intervene in the market to regulate the market, to sometimes remove monopolies, and in some instances to control the prices and to license businesses. And then they also collect taxes to redistribute this wealth. For example, to provide national security, infrastructure, or to fund public healthcare and education. I've used the word demand severally in my previous video, and I've mentioned it here once. So what is this demand? Demand is when people have the ability to pay for what you're selling and are also willing to pay for what you're selling. Two very important words: ability and willingness. Ability means that they can afford what you're selling, and willingness means that they find whatever it is that's being sold to be useful, and they are ready to pay for it, and they want to pay for it. If people can't afford what you're selling, that's not demand. And if people are not willing to pay for what you're selling, that's not demand either. So to illustrate this, let me give a common example of demand and how we subconsciously gauge demand from a young age. If you ask a teenager what they want to be when they grow up, a majority will ask you, which one has money? So let me decode that for you. In essence, what they want to know is, if I invest my time and energy and money to go to university to learn astrophysics, for example, can I be guaranteed that there's a company that will hire me and pay me for my skills in astrophysics? Or is it going to be a waste of time and money? Meaning by the time I graduate, there is no one willing to hire me for my astrophysics skills. That means there is no demand in the market for astrophysics skills. Same thing if you want to have a business. You want to know that there's a need for the product or the service that you're selling. And if people will be able to buy it at the price that you're selling it at, and if they can't afford it, you either reduce the price, and if you can't reduce the price to a point where you can cover your costs and still make a reasonable profit, then obviously there's no point of producing the good, because you'll just make losses. I keep on saying businesses are not created for fun, they're created for profit. So which brings me to now disposable income. Disposable income is the money that you remain with after paying your taxes as an individual. So with disposable income, obviously you first pay for your basics, that's like paying for rent, your housing, your transport and food. And the money that remains after, you can decide to spend that on luxuries like traveling or buying an expensive watch. Basically things that you don't need but you can afford. Like you don't need 70 pairs of shoes, but you can afford them anyway, so you're supporting a business. So you can also either save or invest in a bank or in a circle, and they in turn lend that money to other people who can use that money to fund their businesses or build a house, etc. Same thing when it comes to disposable income for businesses. So for businesses, disposable income is the money that businesses remain with after paying their suppliers, salaries, loans, and taxes. When they have enough disposable income, they can decide to reinvest this cash back into the business, and they can decide maybe to improve their technology, or they can hire more staff to introduce a new product. And if they have capacity, they can also grow into other regions. But here's the thing, they can only have this disposable money if people are buying from them and they are able to meet their expenses at the very least. So from where I've reached so far, I want you to take this home. A business will not survive if people are not buying from them. And people cannot buy from businesses if they don't have money. Do you see where I'm going with this? It's also the same justification for government spending. where the government decides to outsource its services from the private sector. So in Kenya, that's often what we call tenderpreneurship. Now, aside from the people who are employed in the public sector, and this tenderpreneurship means the government is buying services from us, private citizens and businesses. And they can decide to hire citizens to construct maybe a road, to supply materials, to provide cleaning services or consultancy services. It's very wide, the tenderpreneurship options. So you see, demand and disposable income go hand in hand. There'll be no demand if there's no money. And if there's no money, there'll be no demand. And this cycle ends up creating employment for people in the process, such that when there's demand for a business's goods and services and they sell more in the process, the business is able to grow and they can scale up and produce more to meet the growing demand. And to produce more, they need to employ more people. And when these people are paid, like yourselves, when you're paid by your companies, you're able to spend on other things. And at the bare minimum, you're able to meet your basic needs. So don't underestimate this chain effect because it spreads across millions of people. You spend on businesses, they're able to retain their employees, who also spend on other businesses, and this chain effect leads to something like this. So this cycle leads to employment, which in turn leads to financial independence and prosperity, which then leads to more demand because as you become more financially independent, you start now wanting to drive a car, buy a chopper. You demand for more things now because you can afford it. And with such, that's what we call economic growth, a growth in demand. So this is the lifeline of an economy. So the role of a decent and responsible government is to maintain this cycle by taking care of the factors that may interrupt this cycle. So on the flip side of things, life can happen and there's some things that can happen that interfere with this cycle and interrupt it. And I want to show you how bad it can get using an extreme situation. And I'll use the example of negative economic demand shocks. So negative economic demand shocks are unexpected, unpredictable events that affect demand. For example, droughts, rise in fuel, war, hurricanes, pandemics, terrorist attacks. Those are negative economic demand shocks. And they're called negative economic demand shocks because they create a mindset of fear and uncertainty of what lies ahead. So people would rather save as opposed to spending their money or investing it. Think about it. If you're an employee of a company and you know that business isn't doing well, and you might be retrenched, you're more likely to start saving, right? Just in case you're laid off. But you can imagine if there are tens of millions of people who are making similar decisions to you. The decision to save and not to spend. This effect is compounded and it becomes much worse because everyone decides to save. So if people are saving, who is going to spend on businesses? And how will businesses stay afloat if no one is spending on them? How will they retain their employees or pay their suppliers? And I'll use the case of COVID to demonstrate this. COVID affected demand on a global level through very many complicated channels, but I'll only focus on Kenya. So watch how this series of events plays out. The first case of COVID is detected in Kenya in March of 2020. Then the government of Kenya places a restriction on gatherings plus a curfew. So the restriction on gatherings means that there's no more social events, no weddings, funerals, parties, and restaurants remain closed for a time. That in itself killed the entire tourism, entertainment, and hospitality industries, all because of government regulations. But obviously at the time, it was needed. So you can't spend on concerts and events because the government has said there'll be no concerts or events because they're trying to control the spread of COVID. So what happens to the businesses that were in the industry? what happens to them? See, obviously they've shut down. So for the curfew, what it meant was that businesses had to close early so that their employees can get home on time. So people normally pay rent in businesses, but rent isn't determined by the amount of time that you spend in that premises. So whether or not you use that premise for 2 hours or 10 hours, you can imagine when you're paying rent for using it for a longer period. Initially, businesses were directed to allow their employees to work from home. President Uhuru Kenyatta is the one who told businesses to allow the employees to work from home. But let's look at the statistics in Kenya to see if this was a viable option. 20% of Kenya's workforce is in the formal employment sector, and the other 80% is in the informal sector. That translates to a total of 2.9 million people in the formal sector and 14.5 million people in the informal sector. But what do we mean by the informal sector? The informal sector consists of your small businesses that are run from home, people who are self-employed, salons, barbershops, house helps, guards at home, construction workers, wage workers in different sectors, juakali, farmers, pastoralists, kiosks, the mtumba businesses, the ladies who used to sell you lunch in your offices, mechanics, spare parts, wholesale and retail business. Those are those people who can really work from home. Obviously, a majority cannot. And just to illustrate with the statistics, recently released showed that only 13% of people who were employed in the formal sector were able to work from home, 12% worked from home partially, and 75% had to go to the office or were laid off. That's in the formal sector. In the informal sector, only 10% were able to work from home. And because of this, in the Kenyan context, the curfew was fine, but only for a certain period and for as long as the government was prepared and was taking proactive measures to make people feel safe by providing free masks and sanitizers to the public and equip public hospitals with doctors and PPEs so that they can adequately deal with the surge in the COVID cases just in case the surge happened. So anything besides that, remember, you're destroying the economy and you're destroying people's livelihoods, because I've given you the statistics. Working from home was not a viable option in Kenya. Remember, economics is how people make decisions and how they end up affecting everyone else. So the economists who were saying open up the economy essentially meant that if the curfew is extended any longer, businesses and business owners will continue to operate below capacity. They will not make enough revenue and they will shut down. And on top of that, if they shut down, people will not have jobs. Again, as you close the economy, people get new preferences and their spending patterns change, and sometimes they change permanently. And that just means that some businesses might never recover. And this is why developed economies like the US, what they did on the onset of COVID was to give people a stimulus package so that people can continue to spend. So stimulus packages are a way of counteracting a change in your buyer behavior by inducing you to spend. And on the demand side, a majority of people and companies stopped spending a lot and began saving for uncertain times. So why did this happen? Some people lost their jobs immediately after the curfew was pronounced. For example, some of you had to let go of your house helps. And in other instances, some people had to take pay cuts. So you stopped spending on the things that you don't need. Companies also slashed their budgets and began sourcing for services in-house. So before, if you used to outsource your marketing services, you realize the marketing team that you have internally is enough. And obviously this has a huge negative impact on businesses. For instance, businesses also do business with each other, and most times it's on credit, which means the payment is at a future date. So if one trader who got his goods on credit does not sell those goods, they might end up defaulting on payment. But what if the person who sold those goods to them also got those goods on credit? Do you see the effect? It means that if one person defaults, the entire chain might end up defaulting. Secondly, and this is a tricky bit because people and companies had reduced their spending, businesses had to go to banks or financial institutions to borrow money so that they could stay afloat and be able to pay their suppliers, their employees, their rent and other utilities. So the banks assessed the situation in the economy, and because there's a general uncertainty in the country and in the global economy, and even in the local economy, topped off with the curfew, banks saw that there was no demand and that these businesses might not recover. So what happened? Banks refused to lend money to businesses because these businesses were now risky ventures during this COVID period. Therefore, if they're risky, that means that they might not be able to pay back this money because either way, no one is buying from them or people have reduced their spend with a significant amount. The aftermath is that businesses shut down, jobs were lost and demand reduced further and the cycle continued. And let's look at the statistics to gauge the damage and the outcome of all this just between 2020 and 2021. So in Kenya, there are 7.41 million micro, small and medium enterprises, and that's mostly now the informal sector. 30% of MSMEs shut down, and this translates to 2.2 million micro, small and medium enterprises closing down permanently. These MSMEs, micro, small and medium enterprises, employ between 1 and 99 people. So in addition to that, businesses reported a decline in sales of 50 to 75%. That means a 50 to 70% decline in demand. So if before COVID you were making 100,000 Kenya shillings and demand reduced by this percentage, this means that companies were only making sales of 25,000 to 50,000 during COVID. And in consequence, the aftermath of all this is that 2 million people have lost their jobs in just 1 year, both in the formal and informal sector, and an additional 2 million have gotten into poverty in just 1 year. So you see, demand and disposable income is the lifeline of an economy. If there is low demand, then businesses will not need to produce more than they already are, or they might not meet their expenses and their costs, and they also won't need to hire more people, and they might not be able to do business with other businesses. And this leads to unemployment, and because you have no source of income, you can't afford the basics. Low demand causes unemployment, and unemployment leads to poverty. So why is this relationship important? It's important because beyond this cycle, other things come up known as negative socioeconomic effects. Unemployment and poverty is one of them, and they both have their own implications in a country, and I'll cover that as a topic by itself. If you want to understand demand and disposable income better, just think about it as a consumer. What are those things that would make you go into savings mode? Same too as a business owner or as an employer. What are those things that would make you not hire people aside from skills? What are those things that would make you start or not start a business or continue to run it? Businesses rely on households and individuals and other businesses to spend on them, to buy their products, and that is demand. And in turn, individuals and households rely on businesses to hire them and get paid a salary, because that's the only way they'll get to spend. Where does money come from? You can't print money in an economy. There was a time where every investment report said that there's an upcoming middle class in Kenya. So the rationale and justification at the time for bringing their companies and investing in Kenya was that Kenyans were now just getting the ability to start spending on their businesses. So demand was increasing because Kenyans were making money. I'm not so sure that's the case right now, but it depends on the sector. So many things can alter demand patterns, such as seasons and new trends, new technology, a change in preference, new choices that are available, new incentives or disincentives to do business, and shocks like I've explained. And that is a natural business cycle. But aside from these, there are times when economic stagnation is from government interference. When that's the case, I like to call that an economic sabotage, which is a slow kill for the economy. I'll see you in the next one for that. If you found this video to be useful, make sure you share and subscribe and leave a comment down below. Cheers. See you in the next video.